Welcome to the Light and Shadow podcast. I am Gray, quantum informed, spiritual mentor, founder of the Ethereus Academy, and a creator of the Alchemical Pattern-to-Healing Framework. I work at the threshold where insight alone stops working and real transformation begins. This is the space for the spiritually aware who are ready to go deeper than healing has taken them. I want to ask you something that sounds simple and is anything but. What is love? Not what you feel in the beginning, in the electricity of a new connection, in the intoxication of being chosen, in the warmth of being wanted. Not the love songs, not the cultural script. Not the love that depends on how someone treats you today, or whether they are currently meeting your needs or living up to your expectations. What is love, actually? Because I think most of us have spent our entire lives in relationships we called love that were something else entirely. Not because we were dishonest, not because we didn't care, but because we were never taught what love actually is. We were handed a definition shaped by movies and wounds and ego. And we built our most important relationships on that incomplete foundation and wondered why they kept collapsing. Here is what I have come to understand. Through the ancient teachings, through the words of the one teacher in all of recorded history who defined love with the most precision and the most radical clarity, through years of working with people at the threshold of their most broken and most transformative moments. Love is not a feeling. Love is not a transaction. Love is not a reward for good behavior or a response to being treated well. Love is a state of being. And at its deepest, at its most honest and most challenging, love is forgiveness. Not the forgiveness most people understand. Not the forgiveness that requires an apology before it can be given. Not the forgiveness that is actually suppressed anger with a spiritual costume. Forgiveness, in the deepest sense, the sense that Jesus meant when he defined love with a precision that the modern world has almost entirely missed, is the capacity to extend the grace to someone who is not where you are, who cannot meet you where you are, who does not have the capacity, emotional, mental, spiritual, and sometimes financial, to love you the way you love, and to love them anyway, not despite that gap, through it. Today we are going into what love actually is. Why forgiveness is its most complete expression. Why ego is the single most destructive force in a human relationship. And how the separation between two people almost always begins not with a betrayal, but with the moment where one person's ego could not accept the other person's limitation. And what it means to love the way the greatest teacher of love in history asked us to, without condition, without scorekeeping, without the ego's constant demand to be matched, to be understood, to be returned to in kind. This is the hardest teaching, and it is the only one that actually works. So let's begin. Before we can talk about what love is, we have to dismantle what most people have been calling love, because the misidentification is at the root of almost every relationship that has ever ended in pain. Now, love is not a feeling, the feeling that most people call love. The warmth, the electricity, the sense of rightness, the desire to be near someone, the ache of missing them is real. It is beautiful. It matters. But it is not love. It is the emotional and neurological response to love's early conditions. It is attachment. It is chemistry. It is the nervous system's recognition of something familiar, something desired, something that promises to meet a need. And the proof is simple. That feeling ends. or changes, or is not consistently present, or disappears entirely in a long-term relationship, and people say, I've fallen out of love. As if love were something that happened to them and then stopped. You cannot fall out of love. You can fall out of the feeling. You can fall out of the neurochemistry. You can lose the emotional warmth. But love, real love, is not contingent on the feeling being present. If it were, no parent would love a child through the years of adolescent cruelty. No one would stay through illness, through difficulty, through the seasons of a long relationship when the warmth has temporarily retreated. No one would forgive anything that actually cost them something. Love is not a transaction. Transactional love says, I give you this, you give me that. I meet your needs, you meet mine. I love you when you behave in ways I approve of. I withdraw love when you don't. It looks like love because it involves caring, generosity, and connection when the exchange is going well. But the moment the other person fails to hold up their side, fails to meet the need, fails to respond the way you expected, fails to match your level of giving, the love is withdrawn. Or it becomes a weapon. After everything I have done for you, this is not love. That is investment expecting return. And when the return doesn't come, what looked like love reveals itself as something that had conditions attached the entire time. Now, love is not equality of capacity. This is the piece that almost no one talks about. And it is the piece that destroys more good relationships than infidelity, more than conflict, more than any dramatic betrayal. Most people unconsciously require the person they love to be at their level, to meet them where they are emotionally, mentally, spiritually, to understand what they understand, to feel what they feel, to have arrived at the same place in their development. And when the other person cannot, when they are simply not there yet, when their emotional vocabulary doesn't match yours, when their capacity for self-awareness or vulnerability or depth is genuinely less developed, the relationship is experienced as a failure, as incompatibility, as proof that this person does not actually love you. But what if they love you with everything they have? What if their everything just looks different from yours? What if the person who cannot say, I love you, with ease, is showing love through every practical act of care they've performed? What if the person who cannot process emotion with your sophistication is doing the absolute best their nervous system and their history allow? What if the gap between where they are and where you are is not evidence of a love deficit, but simply evidence of a developmental difference? Love is not the demand that someone be who they are, not yet capable of being. That demand, dressed as a standard, as a boundary, as knowing your worth, is not love. It is ego. And we will come back to that. Now, let's go to the source. Because in all human history, across every philosophical tradition, every spiritual framework, every attempt to define the undefinable, one teacher gave the most precise, the most radical, and the most demanding definition of love that has ever been articulated. And it was not a definition most people have actually received, because receiving it fully would require dismantling almost everything the ego has built. So when Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment was, what the fundamental organizing principle of a human life should be, he didn't say be happy. He didn't say be successful. He didn't say find your purpose or know your worth. He said, love God with everything you have and love your neighbor as yourself. And when pressed, when the questioner asked cleverly, but who is my neighbor? He answered with the parable of the Good Samaritan, a story deliberately chosen to make his audience uncomfortable. Because in first century Judea, Samaritans were the despised other, the people who crossed the street to avoid, the ones who were not on your level, not culturally, not religiously, not socially. The neighbor, Jesus said, is the one you would least naturally extend love to, the one who is different, the one who has wronged your people, the one who cannot meet you on equal terms. And then, in what may be the most radical statement about love ever made, he said, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. This is not a suggestion for emotional masochism. This is not an instruction to be a doormat. This is the most precise description of what love actually is at its most complete state of being that does not depend on how the other person is showing up. That does not require reciprocity. That does not measure itself against what is being returned. Love, in its definition, is not a response. It is an origin. You do not love because you are loved. You do not love because the person deserves it. You do not love because you feel like it, or because the other person is meeting your standards, or because the relationship is going well. You love because love is what you are, when the ego steps aside. In Paul's letter to the Corinthians, a text so precise about the nature of love that it has survived 2,000 years and is still real at weddings, still referenced in literature, still recognized as the most accurate map of love ever written. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Love never fails. So listen to that again carefully. Every single quality described is the absence of ego. The ego is not patient. It is urgent. It needs resolution now. Needs the apology now. Needs the change now. The ego is not consistently kind. It is kind when kindness serves it and withdraws kindness when it doesn't. The ego is exclusively self-seeking. Every thought, every action, every relationship is evaluated through the lens of what it provides to the ego's sense of self, of itself. The ego is a meticulous accountant. It records every slight, every failure, every time the other person did not meet this standard. It carries a ledger. Love is the complete suspension of the ego's agenda in the presence of another person. Not forever, not in a way that requires self-erasure, but in the moments that matter, in the moments of another person's failure, limitation, or inability to match you. Love is a capacity to remain open, to remain present, to remain in relationship with what is rather than punishing what is not. And this is where forgiveness enters. Not as the popular understanding of forgiveness, which is about releasing resentment after someone has wronged you. Forgiveness, in the deepest sense, is the ongoing practice of releasing the demand that someone be different from who they currently are. It is forgiving someone for not being at your level, for not having your emotional intelligence, for not having your financial consciousness, for not having your spiritual development, for not being capable of the depth of intimacy you are capable of. This is not lowering your standards. This is recognizing that love does not require equality as its prerequisite. You can love someone who is not where you are. You can love them fully, honestly, with clear eyes about who they are and who they are not, and love them anyway. not in spite of the gap, not pretending the gap doesn't exist, but in full awareness of the gap, choosing to extend the grace rather than demand arrival. And this is what Jesus meant. This is what every genius, mystic, and teacher of love in every tradition has pointed toward. Love is not the emotion between two people who are perfectly matched. Love is the grace extended to the person who is not yet who you need them to be, and maybe never will be. And the radical, ego dissolving act of loving them anyway. Now let's talk about what is actually destroying relationships. Not incompatibility, not the wrong person, not bad timing, not differences in love languages or attachment styles or astrological signs. Ego. Specifically, the moment when one person's ego cannot accept the other person's limitation. Now, what ego actually is? The ego is not a villain, it is a survival structure, a psychological architecture built in childhood to protect the vulnerable self from a world that was sometimes unsafe, sometimes critical, sometimes withholding. The ego is the part of you that learned to manage how you are perceived, that developed strategies for getting love, for avoiding rejection, for maintaining safety in relationships. The ego needs to be right. It needs to be seen. It needs to be valued. It needs to be matched. It needs its love to be returned in the exact currency it was given. And when it isn't, when the other person fails to meet it where it needs to be met, the ego interprets that failure as a verdict about its own worth. This is the root of almost every relationship dissolution that did not involve genuine abuse or fundamental incompatibility. Not that love was absent, but that ego made the other person's limitation mean something about the ego's value, and then defended against that perceived wound through withdrawal, through judgment, through the careful construction of a case for why the other person is not enough. The ego maintains a meticulous ledger of giving and receiving. It tracks who said what, who did what, who gave more, who appreciated less. And when the ledger feels unbalanced, when the ego perceives that it has given more than it has received, love becomes leverage. I have given so much, you gave so little. The relationship becomes a negotiation rather than a sanctuary. True love keeps no record, not because a record doesn't exist, but because love has decided that the relationship matters more than the accounting. The need to win arguments. The ego cannot be wrong. Being wrong threatens the ego's sense of competence, of being enough, of being worth loving. So it fights. Not to resolve the conflict, but to be right. Not to understand the other person, but to be understood first. Watch what happens in the arguments of people who genuinely love each other versus people whose egos are in conflict. In genuine love, the goal of conflict is understanding and resolution. In ego conflict, the goal is victory. And the victory costs the relationship something each time it is claimed. The ego constantly measures what it has against what others have, measures the relationship against an ideal, measures the partner against a standard. Other people's partners do this. Other relationships look like that. I deserve someone who can give me what I see elsewhere. The comparison is always to an image, a curated, incomplete, idealized image of what love looks like from the outside. And it always makes the actual relationship feel insufficient. The ego is present when the conditions are right, when the partner is behaving as desired, when the relationship feels good, when needs are being met. But the moment the conditions shift, the moment the partner is struggling, is not showing up optimally, is having their human limitations, the ego withdraws. Not always dramatically, sometimes just subtly. a coolness, a distance, a withholding of warmth that communicates, I am here when you are at your best. I am less here when you are not. Now, the person on the receiving end of conditional presence does not feel loved. They feel auditioned. They feel that they must perform adequately to receive the love they need. And performing for love, the knowledge that love is contingent on their performance, is one of the most wounding experiences available in human relationships. The ego's primary relational weapons is the withdrawal of love as punishment for not meeting its standards. The silent treatment, the coldness, the emotional unavailability deployed as consequence for the other person's failure to be who the ego needs them to be. This is not a boundary. A boundary is a limit you set to protect your well-being. And it is communicated clearly. The withdrawal of love as punishment is a power move. It is the ego using the other person's attachment as leverage. And it works in the short terms. The person who fears losing you will adjust their behavior to regain warmth. But what they are actually learning is that your love is not safe, that it can be removed, that they must monitor your emotional temperature and calibrate themselves accordingly. The relationship that runs on this pattern is not a love relationship, it is a fear relationship. Both people afraid, one of losing the love and one of their own unworthiness if they cannot hold the love in place. Now here is what all of the ego's patterns in relationship are protecting against. The single most terrifying thing the ego can experience: being loved and still not feeling like enough. The ego believes, at its core, beneath all of its strategies, that if it could just receive enough love, enough validation, enough proof of its worth from the right person in the right way, the wound would heal. The emptiness would fill. The sense of being fundamentally not enough would finally, permanently resolve. So it goes into relationship looking for that resolution. And when the relationship, inevitably, because no relationship can provide this, does not provide it, the ego does not conclude that it was looking in the wrong place. It concludes that it has the wrong person. This is the cycle. New relationship. Initial intensity. The ego feels seen and chosen. Gradually, the other person reveals their limitations. The ego's wound resurfaces. The relationship fails to fill the void the ego brought into it. The ego blames the other person. The relationship ends. New relationship, and so on. Again, repeat. The content changes. The wound is constant. And the wound cannot be healed by love from the outside. It can only be healed by the ego's willingness to meet its own wound, to stop requiring the other person to resolve what only the self can resolve. This is not the other person's job. It never was. The separation between two people, the moment the connection begins to fracture, almost never begins with a dramatic event. It begins with a moment, a small moment, where one person's ego could not accept the other person's limitation and made that limitation mean something unforgivable. The partner who couldn't find the right words when comfort was needed, and the ego decided that this meant they didn't care. The partner who forgot something important, and the ego decided that this meant they didn't value the relationship. The partner who couldn't match the depth of emotional expression being offered, and the ego decided that this meant the love wasn't real. In each of these moments, the ego is making the other person's limitation into a verdict, and then building a case, and then withdrawing, and then the other person feeling the withdrawal, contracts, and then the distance grows, and then both people are alone inside the relationship, convinced that the other person is the problem, unable to see that what they are actually experiencing is the accumulated weight of moments where ego chose judgment over grace. This is how love ends. Not in betrayal, in the 10,000 small moments where ego was chosen over forgiveness. So, what is the alternative? If ego destroys, what builds? Forgiveness. As a daily practice, as the active, ongoing, deliberate choice to release the demand that the other person be different from who they currently are. Let's be precise about what this means and what it does not. What forgiveness in love is not. Forgiveness is not pretending the limitation doesn't exist. You are not required to be blind to who someone is. Real love sees clearly. It sees the limitation, the underdevelopment, the gap between where someone is and where you need them to be, and loves anyway. The clarity is part of the love. Blind love is not love, it is projection. Forgiveness is not accepting abuse. If someone is harming you physically, emotionally, systematically, forgiveness does not require you to remain in proximity to the harm. You can forgive someone completely and simultaneously recognize that the relationship cannot continue in its current form. These are not contradictions. Forgiveness is not a one-time event. It is not something you do once and then it's done. It is a practice, a daily, sometimes moment-to-moment practice of releasing the ego's demand that the person be different. You will need to forgive the same person for the same limitation many times. Not because they keep failing you, but because the ego keeps reasserting its demand. Now, what forgiveness in love actually is? Forgiving someone who is not at your level. This is the core teaching, and it is the one that requires the most from the ego. Because the ego is entirely committed to the idea that love should be equal, that it deserves someone who can meet it where it is, that accepting less than, that is settling. But here is what the ego is missing. No two people are at the same level in every dimension simultaneously. You may be more emotionally developed, and they may be more financially grounded. You may have greater spiritual awareness, and they may have greater practical wisdom. You may be further along in your healing, and they may be further along in their capacity for loyalty. The question is not whether there is a gap. There's always a gap. The question is whether you can love across it. Loving across the gap means recognizing that someone's limitation in one dimension does not negate their love for you or their value as a person. It means releasing the requirement that they understand you in the way you understand yourself. It means meeting them where they are, not requiring them to come to where you are before they earn your love. This is what Jesus said. He did not love only the people who were at his level. He did not reserve his grace for the spiritually developed. He sat with tax collectors and sinners. He touched the lepers. He spoke to the Samaritan woman across every social, gender, and religious boundary of his time. Because love, in his demonstration of it, had no prerequisite of equality. So when you are in a moment of frustration with someone's limitation, when you can feel the ego rising to judge, to withdraw, to make the gap into a verdict, the practice is this. Ask yourself, is this person loving me with what they have? Simply, are they offering what they are capable of offering? If the answer is yes, and very often, if you look with clear eyes rather than ego eyes, the answer is yes. Then the invitation is to receive what is being given rather than withholding gratitude because it does not arrive in the form you specified. The person who expresses love through acts of service is loving you. Even if you need words of affirmation, the person who shows up in crisis, even when they cannot articulate their feelings, is loving you. The person who stays, who simply consistently stays. When staying is difficult is loving you. The ego is looking for love in the exact package it decided love should come in. Forgiveness opens the hands to receive what is actually being given. So every person you love arrived to you preformed by experiences they did not choose, the childhood that shaped their attachment style, the relationships that told them that what love looks like and whether it is safe, the wounds that created their defenses, the gaps in their development that were caused by gaps in what they received. They are not limited out of choice. They are limited by formation, by the specific history that made them exactly who they are, including the parts of them that cannot meet you where you need to be met. Forgiveness at this level is the recognition that the person who cannot love you in the way you need has not failed you out of indifference. They are loving you from inside the constraints of a self that was shaped by forces entirely outside their control. Now, this does not excuse harm. This does not require you to accept what is genuinely damaging, but it does dissolve the ego's most consuming narrative, the one that makes the other person's limitation into a personal attack on your worth. Their limitation is not about you. It predates you. It was formed long before you arrived. Receiving that truth, letting it actually land, is one of the most freeing experiences available in relationship. So the love that is hardest to access in relationships, and the one that makes everything else possible, is the love you extend to yourself. Because the ego's relentless judgment of others in relationship is almost always a projection of its relentless judgment of itself. The person who cannot forgive a partner's failure to be perfect is the same person who cannot forgive their own failures. The person who requires their partner to always show up optimally is the person who requires that of themselves and collapses inward when they cannot. You cannot give what you do not have. And the capacity to love someone across their limitations, to extend a genuine grace to their developmental gaps, requires that you have first extended that grace to yourself. Your own limitations, your own gaps, the ways you have failed in love, the moments where your ego destroyed something good, the places where you were not yet who you needed to be. Forgive those. Not as permissions to remain unchanged, but as the foundation from which actual change becomes possible. Because growth does not come from self-punishment. It never has. It comes from the safety of self-acceptance, the knowledge that your limitations do not make you unworthy of love, which paradoxically creates the conditions for those limitations to actually shift. Now let's talk about the other side, because this is the invitation, not just away from ego's destruction, but toward what love actually feels like when it is not being run by the ego's agenda. Real love is not primarily experienced in the grand gestures, and it is experienced in the accumulation of ordinary moments where the ego was present and chose grace anyway. The moment you were frustrated and chose curiosity instead. The moment you wanted to win and chose understanding instead. The moment you wanted to be right and chose the relationship instead. The moment someone's limitation activated your wound and you actually paused and asked, what does this person need right now? Rather than, how is this person failing me? Those moments are love. They are not dramatic. They are not Instagram worthy. They are the fabric of a relationship that actually holds. And love does not eliminate conflict. It changes what conflict is for. In ego-driven relationships, conflict is for winning, for proving the point, for making the other person understand the impact of their failure. In love-driven relationships, conflict is for understanding, for closing the gap, for the two people involved to come out of the difficult conversation knowing each other better than they did going in. The question that transforms conflict Not how do I make you understand what you did wrong, but what is happening for you that produced this? What do you need that I haven't been providing? What am I not seeing about your experience? These are not the questions of a defeated ego. They are the questions of a love that has decided the other person's inner world matters more than the ego's need to be right. Love is most visible and most tested, not in the good seasons, but in the difficult ones. When the other person is struggling, when they are not at their best, when they are showing you the parts of themselves that are unhealed, unresolved, still under construction. The ego leaves in these seasons or punishes because it did not sign up for this version. The version that needs, the version that is afraid, the version that is not measuring up to the standard that earned love in the first place. Love stays. Not because staying is always the right choice. Sometimes leaving is the most loving thing available for both people. But when love stays through difficulty, it communicates something to the other person that nothing else can. I see you at your most limited. I see you at your most afraid. I see you at your most human. And I'm still here. That experience of being stayed with in one's worst season is what heals the original wound that makes love feel unsafe. It is what teaches the nervous system that love is not conditional on performance, that it does not require you to be at your best to be worthy of it. Because you cannot judge someone into becoming more loving. You cannot punish someone into greater capacity. You cannot withdraw love from someone and produce their growth. You can only love them clearly, honestly, with full awareness of who they are, and create the conditions in which growth becomes possible because the threat of love's removal has been taken off the table. So love is not a feeling that comes and goes. It is not a transaction that requires equal return. It is not a reward for good behavior or a response to being treated the way you deserve. Love is a state of being. And its most complete expression, the expression that Jesus pointed toward, that every genuine teacher of love in every tradition has confirmed, is forgiveness. Not the forgiveness that requires an apology first, not the forgiveness that waits until the other person has earned it through change, but the ongoing, daily, sometimes moment by moment practice of releasing the demand that someone be different from who they currently are. And the ego is the single most consistent destroyer of love available to human beings. The egos refuse to forgive what love is actually asking it to forgive. Now, love does not require you to be a martyr, does not require you to accept harm. It does not require you to stay where you are genuinely unsafe or unseen. But it does require this, that before you make another person's limitation into a verdict, you pause and ask, are they loving me with what they have? And can I love them across the gap between what they have and what I need? If this episode is activating something in you, if you can feel where ego has been running your relationships and you are ready to do the deeper work of actually dismantling it, this is the work of the Alchemical Pattern-to-Healing Framework. Private mentorship and sessions information is at the link in the show notes below. Until next time.